time, we always develop a certain love for a certain game in a franchise or a game overall, making it our favorite game of all time. There's always points as to why this happens, whether it be, nostalgia, whether it be your favorite franchise, whether it be the fact that you find it better than the other ones you previously played. There's definitely reasons why this happens, and sometimes even that can shift depending on how far you are in the series whenever it comes to games, if it does apply to that. So today I want to talk about why certain games meet the number one spot, why certain games hold onto a pedestal for some people and others actually get dethroned. Hard to dethrone games sometimes whenever it comes to certain franchises, especially if there's a laundry list of games within that said franchise. Case in point that I want to make first would be the Legend of Zelda series. So many games that I played in there, but only a few have made the top spots whenever it comes to that series, at least for me personally. For the longest time, Ocarina of Time had been my favorite Legend of Zelda title. Nothing compared to it. Majora's Mask was a little bit close to taking it, but it fell short because it just didn't meet the mark that one did. Now, I had played Link to the Past. I had played other titles in the series, but nothing was really moving it, not shifting it, until one day I played the demo for a game that I could not believe existed, and that goes to Wind Waker. I remember playing the demo, and I was mesmerized by the cel-shaded graphics, the seafaring, the music, everything about that game checked every single box that I was looking for whenever it came to this series. And whenever I played through the full game, when it finally came out, it dethroned Ocarina of Time. And since then, I played other Zelda titles. I played Breath of the Wild. I played Twilight Princess. You name it, I played it. But nothing has ever dethroned this one. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes it'll sit there for the longest time and not move. And sometimes you play a game for the first time and this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And that was it for me. Now, there's always been some close calls whenever it comes to dethroning one of my favorite games in a franchise. And one that I can definitely point out that I've talked up so many times would be the Final Fantasy series. I've played all the numbered titles, minus 12. I'm not going to play that. I haven't played through the first one completely. So there's still that one that I need to finish for NES, and then the official 2. So, naturally, whenever I'm going to talk about this, I'm just going to talk about the ones that I've finished and, that make the list for this. So, going into what I'm going to talk about. Whenever I actually played through Final Fantasy VI, aka 3 for us, for the first time, I played the PS1 port. And I could not believe how fantastic that game was. It was very this close to making the number one spot, but it didn't outweigh my favorite game of all time in the Final Fantasy series, which is 9. 9 is my favorite. It has been forever. Nothing has ever topped it, but 6 has been the closest one to do that. And I love 6 so much, I actually bought a copy of it on Super Nintendo Complete in Box because that's how much I love this game. From the storytelling, the character development, the overworld music, getting lost like I always do in RPGs, but in a fun way. Ultros, my favorite character overall in the game. I love him. He's still cute. Everything. But there's just something about Final Fantasy IX. It's not nostalgia. It's just the feeling that I get when I play the game that I didn't get the same thing whenever I played 6. I didn't. Even though there's some iconic actual scenes in 6, like whenever you go to the actual opera and you hear Celie sing, that's iconic. Whenever you have to fight Ultros, and it's just amazing bumping into him because he's the comedic relief. There's just something captivating about 9 that I've never been able to find in another Final Fantasy title. Hell, I brought up 8 because 8 technically holds the number 3 place for my Final Fantasy list. A lot of people give 8 shit because of the junction system, because they don't like the story. Well, everything that everybody else hates, I like. I thought it was really well done. It looks way better than a certain title that I mentioned several times over, Final Fantasy VII. It is definitely worth playing, especially for the Gunblade. Who the fuck wouldn't want to play that? Some of us start off playing the sequel first and loving it, then later on down the road going to play the original source and hating it, or playing the first game, loving it, then finally getting to the sequel eventually after a teen amount of years and hating this plastic pile of shit, or like them both. It just really depends. A lot of people have different starting points whenever it comes to games, and that can actually make or break whether you like what better, that you play first or if you play second or whatever the case. So, case in point with a lot of people whenever I've talked to them about these two games. A lot of people that have played Chrono Trigger first love it. It's great. It's the greatest game of all time, which for me it is. It's never been replaced by anything that I've played. I've played so many RPGs across the board. It's ridiculous. That's literally my favorite genre, and I've played literally things bigger than my asshole. For real. That long of a list. Woo! That's a big one. And whenever I talk to people that have played Chrono Trigger and then they play Chrono Cross, they think it's an absolute pile of plastic turds. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, whenever I talk to people that have played Chrono Cross first, they adore it. They're like, it's beautiful, it's a great game, 45 characters, replayability, this, yada yada. OST, wow, whoa, it's a great game on PlayStation 1, critically acclaimed, it's got a greatest hits version. What could go wrong? And then they step into Chrono Trigger, and they're like, meh, what is this? Doesn't hold up to this. This is better than that. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. Or some of them will be like, huh? What? Chrono Trigger? What is that? Trust me, a lot of people don't know what Chrono Trigger is. They don't. I've ran into that several times. So it really just depends on sometimes if it's nostalgia talking or if you start with it first and then go back later. It's flip-flopped for a lot of people within the community. So sometimes people will like the sequel more than the original, or some people will like the original more than the sequel. For me, I started off with Chrono Trigger. I love it. It's fantastic. Chrono Cross came later, of course, naturally. I played it. It was awful. I still fucking hate it. I have said so many times why I hate it. 45 characters suck. The battle system is atrocious as hell. I would not sit on a dog turd to fucking go through that bullshit again. I have played it more than once. Enough. You have to play through it more than once to fucking understand the goddamn thing. Like I said, I can go on a whole tirade whenever it comes to Chrono Cross. But that's not what we're here for today. We're just, comparing and contrasting whenever it comes to, people liking this, that, and the other, and the reasons why behind it. Now, I will tell you this. I didn't always start off playing the original and then the sequel. I don't always start off in order. Now, a case in point with that one, going to flip-flop the other direction, would be the Legend of Legaia series. Now, I played Legaia 2 Dual Saga. This was the very first one in the series I ever played. Never saw the first one growing up at all. I found this one in a game store. Thought it looked neat. Why not give it a try? I did. I hated it. Didn't like it. Haven't touched it since. Just been in my collection for the longest time because I bought it a long time ago, and it just sits there because eventually I'll probably go for a full PS2 set. Yada yada. You've heard that spiel before. Now, years later, I finally get a copy of Legend of Legaia, the first one. This game is a masterpiece. The hyper arts, changing of the actual armor and seeing your weapons change whenever you change them out, Nola, Gala, Vaughn, all of it, the stories, their backstories, everything. It is just an amazing game. I gave this game probably a 9.5 out of 10. The only thing I didn't like about it was the encounter rate, but you get a good bell to actually help with that, or a bad bell to increase it, which is actually a pretty cool mechanic in this game. The only thing about this game, too, that I fucked myself over on was trying to beat Lapis. But I screwed myself, and I couldn't cheese his ass because I don't know what the fuck I did with that egg. I probably sold it because I backtracked like hell and couldn't find it. Anyway, I only played through this once, and it was enough to make my top 30 games of all time. I moved it to 30 because there's so many games I played that I don't have enough room in my top 20 anymore, so we're expanding the horizons. The big one that I've been waiting to drop on y'all. Your first entry into a franchise. Oh boy. Typically, this is when nostalgia plays a role. It plays a role in everything I've said, but this one is the heavy hitter for that. So, a lot of the time when I've talked to people, whenever it comes to Resident Evil and Final Fantasy, this is the big one. These are the big ones for this. Their very first title is the one that they like the most, and it's not shifted gears at all. And that's the one they hold the most nostalgia for. They're like, oh, nothing else tops it. Oh, there's not anything better than that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard it. So let's start off with Final Fantasy. Why not? If it's for fucking great! Not for everything. Especially this one. I mean this one. Just kidding! Anyway, moving on to that. Whenever I've talked about Final Fantasy VII, everyone knows my disdain for this game. A whole bunch! But this is not my first Final Fantasy game. My very first Final Fantasy game that I actually ever played was Final Fantasy IV. That was my very first introductory to the Final Fantasy franchise. No, not Chrono Trigger. We're talking Final Fantasy. That's what we're talking about. Final Fantasy IV. That was my very first one I ever played. And then, of course, it went on from there with the numbered titles. And then, of course, I went backward because I didn't play a lot growing up. Like, I didn't play 6, aka 3. I didn't play 5 until, the last couple of years. But 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 2, so on and so forth, you get the drift. I played a majority of the Final Fantasy series. When it came to 7, oh boy, I did not like that one at all. Tifa's great. She's the only thing about that game that I can stand. Even trying the remake, I played it, I streamed it even, and I still do not like Final Fantasy VII. Hey, at least I gave the remake a try, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that Final Fantasy VII is still the worst Final Fantasy game to exist for me! Anyway, what is my point with this? Well, let's get to it. Like I said, a lot of the time when people refer to their favorite Final Fantasy game, it's always this one. And you know why? There's a few reasons. The number one is what I said at the beginning of this, is it was their very first Final Fantasy game. They didn't play anything on NES, on Super Nintendo, nothing. This was the very first one. So they didn't have any action with the 2D like a lot of us had. So it was 3D or bust. And man, this fucking game has aged like ass drippings coming out of your fucking crack. Bad. But that's one reason. And of course, nostalgia is another big one, like I said before. And people put this game on a pedestal because of what it did. It revolutionized Final Fantasy because it's 3D. Wow! No. So, with that said, we're going to move on to the other franchise that whenever it comes to the introductory to it, everyone says that this is their favorite game and it holds up and it's critically acclaimed. And that goes to Resident Evil 4. What you buying? What you selling? Yes. Same conversation, same point that I'm going to make. Whenever it comes to Resident Evil 4, this was a lot of people's first introductory to Resident Evil. Now, whenever I think about this, I'm an OG player. I started off with Resident Evil 2 on N64, and then, of course, I backtracked and played the first one, the third one, which is still my favorite of all time, Stars. Love Nimi. The remake of RE3 sucked acid and was an abomination. I'll never forgive Capcom for that horse shit. Anyway, people love this one because it was their introductory to it. Leon is the best! No, he's not. I like Leon. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my first game I ever played in the series was 2, and guess who was in it? Leon Kennedy! But that doesn't make this any better. Just because Leon's in it doesn't make it a good game. Now, and another argument people have for me, oh, it's so real. Oh, it was the best thing. It was the best thing Capcom could do for Resident Evil because Resident Evil was dying. Well, you know what? Sure, it may have sold well, sure. It may have actually, helped stop Resident Evil from tanking. But did you see what we got after this shit show happened? Did you forget about Resident Evil 5, the boulder punching bullshit, and the fucking literal plastic hell droppings of RE6 that tried to mimic this shit but failed miserably? People seem to forget that this started all that track. It went from survival horror to action-oriented slap-face bullshit. That's what we got with Resident Evil 4. It was not the way it should have went. At least in my opinion. And like I said, people like the change. They're like, oh, it was so dead zombies. Pew, pew. Oh, scary big monsters. This game's not fucking scary at all. Don't even give me the regenerator bullshit. They were not scary at all. Man, I think that Resident Evil Survivor is a lot scarier than this bullshit on a fucking stick. Anyway, moving on to my point that I'm making with Resident Evil. Like I said, and Final Fantasy. Whenever it comes to introductories to a franchise, typically people hold those games on a pedestal and they refuse to back down and refuse to admit that there are other games better in the franchise, and they refuse to backtrack and play because they can want to complain about things that were in the older games, like, oh, it's not visually pleasing, the 2D stuff isn't for Final Fantasy, or when it comes to Resident Evil, oh, I don't like tank controls, oh, I don't like fixed camera angles, oh, this looks like ass. Well, you know what? That was what made it scary. We did not have complete control over a character. We didn't know what the fuck was going on. Those monsters coming in our faces, literally scaring the fucking little shit out of me. I'll never forget the first time I played RE2 and seeing that fucking licker crawl across the fucking window, or going through and seeing that thing drop out. I turned off the TV and ran like a bat out of hell out of the room. For Resident Evil 4, I'm like, well, this is boring. What the fuck am I playing? The only thing I ever give Resident Evil is the merchant. And I'm sad to say that in the remake, I fucking can't stand the merchant. I don't know why the fuck they did that to him, but they made him just terrible. He doesn't sound the same. It doesn't feel the same. And I give no points to the Resident Evil 4 remake at all, minus, that it looks okay with the engine that they used. That's it. That's all it gets from me. Nothing else. But I wanted to deep dive into this and explain, some of the things that I've encountered as to why people, hold things on a pedestal for certain games, or sometimes how they shift their likes, as far as like their top game, just because certain elements of that, whether it be nostalgia, whether it be they found better, things with the other game that they played. It just really depends on who's playing what and what their preferences are. But hope you enjoyed the video. And of course, this is the PlayStation Girl signing out. Game on!